Oh, we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Viz Review for week 49, I think we're at.
Morning.
I'm losing track. And hello, Charlie.
Hi Eva, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Very, it's grey outside. It's getting dark, but I think Andy has already alluded to this on his Monday call. We are getting a puppy, so everything is just revolving around this puppy at the moment.
Did you get the name sorted yet?
No, we have got a list. Well,
Okay.
I made a list, I guess, because that's how I operate. And we are going to meet the puppy on Sunday. So once
Ooh,
we see her, we will probably know what name kind of fits.
cool, it's exciting. I still haven't got Smudge up here. I'll find him, but he's eating at the moment.
Oh, yeah, priorities, right?
Yeah.
So this week, interesting topic. Let me move us over and actually bring up the thing on data.world. So you found an article about the relationships between Americans and Germans.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't intentional to do that, but I was looking I was looking for data because I wasn't prepared as usual, and I always look on Pew Research because it's so good.
Yeah.
And there was data there, which was interesting. And when I followed it through to the source, the actual chart was not great because Pew Research generally present data really well. So their chart was like a Makeover Monday, but the original was a bit crap. So I was just intrigued. I was intrigued to see what people could do. And then it made me think about, because the pattern of the data was, there was no overlap. The Germans always had a negative opinion and the Americans always had a favourable opinion.
Yeah.
And I just wondered how best can we present that complete difference of opinion. So I'm interested to see what people have done.
What I also found challenging is when I looked at those original charts is the percentage who say relations today between the US and Germany are, and then it's like US. So does that mean this is the columns of the Americans and what they say about the Germans? Like, I found that really difficult based on their charts to get my head around, because they have the wording, they're trying to make it like a sentence, but it just doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
Because the first thing I read is US and Germany rather than good or bad. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how people resolve that challenge.
So we've got loads of submissions again this week. So the short list is not short. There's about 50. So we definitely won't get through all of them, but let's have a good go.
And do we start at the very bottom?
Right at the bottom, please.
Okay. Now, I've actually been thinking about, so I've literally just started doing my Viz because I've had a bit of a busy week and we only came back Sunday, like late afternoon. But I've been thinking about why that is how people would respond in a survey. And one suspicion I have is it's actually partly to do with the questions and what Germans define as good and what Americans define as good. Because if somebody does something and a German tells them, oh, that's really good, that is literally the highest praise. Whereas in America, that might be like, oh, that sounds like it's pretty average, right? Because we don't use words like amazing, awesome, fantastic, excellence. Like, we just don't speak like that. Doesn't mean we don't think it. It's just we're not exuberant in our praise. So I wonder, especially if this was an English survey, whether Germans feel more positive, but it just doesn't translate because of the language.
There's loads of factors, and the Trump factor shouldn't be underestimated, because are they expressing their opinions about the relationship with America or their perception of the orange fella?
Exactly. So, and I remember when I was a kid and a teenager growing up, America was the coolest place on the planet. Everything cool came from America. I have since become a bit disillusioned, but it's also, I guess, who you ask. How old are those people and what have they experienced over their lifetime in terms of these relationships?
Yep.
Okay, let's crack into it. The first one I have up is from Devi Priya. And yeah, we've got a very simple Viz. I'm not quite sure what to call the color. It's like a maroon. I'm guessing it's a bit like... Oh no. Oops, I almost ended the stream. Sorry, 1 second. It's a little bit like it's a bit like red and blue, which could be political, but I think the shade of red is more brownish, so it's probably okay. I don't know. I'm letting this kind of work on me.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think we'll have a bit of a journey through stuff this week, because I think this is a data set that was actually really good, and it was definitely versatile, but it doesn't mean that it made it easy to get things across. So what I'm finding with this one is that I'm having to refer up to the inline text at the top regularly, because I don't know, I've got goldfish memory, and I keep having to look up and see, okay, America's blue and Germany's the sort of reddy burgundy kind of colour. Germany, yes. So I'm kind of wasting a bit of time moving my eyes up and down. So I'm wondering if the perfect balance on this is to have the country of the respondent and the good or bad closer together, because at the moment I'm definitely having to wander around a bit.
Yeah, and I wonder if the simplicity of this is oversimplifying it to the point where, like you say, you have to refer back, because this is not saying what do Americans and Germans think about a third topic. It's about each other. So it's this constant crossover. So basically the first line with the maroon says, first point, 42% of Germans think the relationships with America or the relationship with Americans is good. But that's really hard to figure out, I think, in this format. And I think it needs to be spelled out, because it's what Germans think about Americans, then it's what Americans think about Germans, and then the same one again, but with bad. So maybe even on the first column, so the 2017, having a single sentence for each of them that just spells it out, so people can then extrapolate that out. I think here it just doesn't tell me, okay, like, what's the outcome of this?
No, it's like I said, it's sort of, this is the challenge of this data set, is getting that, what is the survey about? And then, because I think it's effective in showing, actually, you can see that in the good row, the blue, which is the American bit, is always higher than the German colouring. So it works in that respect, but that there's just that bit of travel between the top section and the charts themselves. So I'd look as a minimum to bring those closer, but I would consider having America and Germany somehow incorporated in the charts themselves, just to really make it super easy to see.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.
So
then we
Pedro.
have Pedro. I don't know if there is a link. Nope.
Oh, no, that's my clever work again, but it's a good enough one to see just from the image itself.
Yeah. Oh, the image comes up nice and big on my screen.
So how would you rate the current relationship between Germany and the United States? So nice and clear, little subtitle to reinforce it. And so this time, Pedro's gone the different route of using colour to highlight good or bad. So actually, this is quite a good comparison that we can do with the first one. So in the first one, colour was country. This time it's the response. So we can easily see that United States column. We can see the good massively outweighs the bad every time. And we can see the opposite on the German data. So it's effective. It feels easier. It feels easier to see that the responses for the respondents, so for each country. I guess the only question is how comparable they are country to country. So you've got to do quite a bit of work to say, okay, the bad responses in the United States were 21% in 2020 compared to 79% in Germany. So there's a little bit of work you've got to do there. So it's again, it's a compromise of what am I actually plotting, the in-country response or the country versus country response, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the challenge here. And again, I think some of the stuff in the subtitle I would repeat or move to just a single simple sentence under each country, where because the overall sentiment hasn't really changed over the years. In Germany, the bad has gotten worse, the good has gotten worse. So there are more people now who think the relationships are bad. There are less people who think it's good. So there's no crossover. So one sentence should cover it consistently, saying in the US, or something to this effect, in the US, predominantly people see the relationship with Germany as good. and then maybe you point to the right side, like just something that makes it easier to understand, because this data set is deceptively simple. I think the data itself is simple. It's also probably quite simple to visualize because we've seen a lot of quite clean charts.
Yeah.
But communicating what the actual point is, or what does this mean? That's the hard part this week, and I love that actually because that's a really good challenge.
Yeah, so with this specific chart, this is totally up my street of laying information out. So it's incredibly clean. The type of font is great. I think maybe there's an argument for colouring the values the same colour as the dots, just to really hammer home which response it is. But I really like it. I can't fault it. Maybe I'd make the title a little bit bigger, but that's just saying something.
What about doing something like a color legend next to each country label? So if you had a little red circle that said bad or negative, so that it just reinforces that here we have all the high numbers with the good, and here all the high numbers are with the bad. I don't know. I find the colored words are a bit lost in the title because they just don't really pop for me. This is maybe it's also the dimension of the image, but that's something I would test.
Yep, cool. Let's shift on and see if anyone else finds a solution to that.
Yes.
Other challenge. So Brandon, I know, is in the chat. So Brandon, here we go. Okay, so are Americans and Germans living in two separate realities? So we've got like this half and half color scheme. Look, they're not colors, are they? What do you call them? Black and white? I don't know.
Monochromatic.
There we go. That sounds good.
Something.
So nice what Eva said, way of doing stuff. So when asked in 2020, so Brandon's looked just at 2020, which was an option you had. So there were 4 years of data, but he's just looking at the latest results. And I think he's sort of factoring in an element of what you've been saying with like bad in air quotes and good in quotes, because what is the definition of bad and good? It's quite subjective. But this does a really good job, I think, of showing that stark difference, doesn't it? Because that contrast really reinforces the different responses. So you can see that difference very, very clearly.
I really like that he's included a note to say don't know, responses are not shown, because there is a difference to 100%, and that's not really explained, that it's not visible. So it's good that he explains that.
Yeah, and then underneath we've got some comments involving elements of Trump and giving it a little bit of background. So it just fleshes it out a bit, because like you said, it is a bit of it's a more complex topic than maybe just the original show. So to add that extra bit of detail goes some way to making it a bit more understandable. So I think that's great. I think the use of colour, or the lack of colour, is great. So all in all, Brendan, I think it's really, really quite good.
Yeah, agreed. And then we have Hui next. Okay. Americans see relationship with Germany in good standing, but Germans see it as bad. And I understand the approach taken, but to me, all I see is colored rectangles. I don't really see anything super insightful. Like it doesn't really explain it for me, or I guess it shows the contrast, but maybe because they're so close to each other, I'm like, what am I actually looking at here?
Yeah, I think the lack of white space, at least vertically, is a challenge, and I think they seem like unnaturally wide bars as well, which is something which jars with me a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'd want to create a bit more space, and I think it's got the same challenge that the first couple of submissions had, where you have to keep looking up to that title to remember what's good and what's bad. So I'm warming to the idea that the best or most efficient solution this week was having the country and the response together in some form, maybe as discrete sort of text blocks or something like that, because I think this shows a difference, but you have to keep referring back to that title to see what the difference is.
Yes, and what I found an odd choice of insight is the subtitle says Germans' positive views towards the United States has reached its lower, well, it should be have, because it's views, have reached their lowest point with only 19% in 2020. I have to go all the way to the very last data point on the page to get that 19%, because I'm like, where's 19%? My assumption as, I guess a data person is if there's something you're calling out, it's going to be very obvious. Given that these are all colored the same style, I would have expected it near the top because it seems to be important. And I think it is important. It is a good point to call out because, wow, only 20%, less than 20% of Germans think the relationships are positive, which is very different from, when I was younger and everyone, was very positive about it. But that needs to be more obvious.
Yeah, it's just how you word it, isn't it? So, positive opinions of Germans towards Americans are declining, something like that. Because to say positive and lowest in the same sentence kind of conflicts in my head.
Yeah, true. Okay. I think that's a bit of feedback to work with. And then we have Christoph, who I'm not sure if he's online.
I don't think I've seen him today.
Okay.
It's typical, isn't it? Here every week and then dips off the time he's on. But it's one of my favourites, the old butterfly chart. So divergent opinions on the transatlantic alliance. So the percentage who say that the relationships are good. So Christoph's taken the approach of making that interpretation easier by stripping out one of the responses. So you can almost conclude, can't you, that if this is just looking at the good responses, then the majority of the others are going to be bad. So it's a good solution, really, isn't it? Because it takes away half the data and makes it a lot easier to see. So I think in terms of a data selection decision, that was a really good idea. But it's these butterfly charts again, and I don't know. Oh, Christoph's there. I just don't know if anyone's got any comments in the chat about what they think the advantages of a butterfly chart are. So Denise likes it, but I'm going to disagree with Denise because it just doesn't work for me having stuff moving in the opposite directions. So Neutrino is now disagreeing with me. So everyone's going to disagree with me now.
I agree with you, which might just be boring. But I was wondering if you had a bar chart and rather than why not, for example, on the American side, have a little line. This is this is the percentage of Americans and Germans that think the relationships are good, and this is how many more people in America, or how many more percent of people in America think that the relationship is what is the gap between them?
Mm-hmm.
And you could do that if you overlay them, I suppose, because then you also see what's the difference right here. I think because the contrast is pretty large, you can see that these are much shorter, but it's harder to compare across the butterflies. So if you had them on one bar with some reference lines or something to show where do the Germans stop agreeing and where's the exuberance of the Americans, then that could be interesting.
Yeah, Andy's made a good point in the chat, so he is useful now and then. So he said that actually it would be quite useful if you would do an outline around the 100% sort of shadowed bit, just to make it that bit more prominent, to understand how far each side's got to go to 100, because it is quite muted with a grey background. So yeah, that's definitely a good suggestion.
Yeah, definitely. I love the clean design though. Otherwise, it's really cool. Okay, it's quite a small chart. I think, Christoph, you can go larger. And then Agatha, who was inspired by her couch cushions for the color.
So this is trademark Agatha, isn't it? So it's really just nice design, and it's incredibly simplistic. What it doesn't highlight immediately, I don't think. So it doesn't reference the year that it relates to. So that's just one suggestion I would make. So I assume this is the 2020 response rate. So I'd want to include that. But this is kind of like what I was banging on about, this bringing together the response of bad and good and the country, because it's there within one glance, whereas you're not having to wander your eyes all around the page to see what's what. So it makes it really clear. And this these divergent bar charts are like the sort of, not trademark, but they're such an effective way of showing survey responses, because you get that really quick response. I found them quite alien when I first started looking at survey responses, but now it's kind of, I can't almost think of another way of looking at them, because it really does work once you've trained your brain to take it in. So I just think it's very effective, and just that omission of the year is all that's needed.
Yeah, the one small thing, and Andy literally just typed it as well, is there's this orange bar, and I was trying to figure out why it's there, because it kind of underlines Germans, but it stands for bad, but it's also the next item after the word good. So I think it's a design element to just break it up a bit, but I wonder if it would be better to have it in the same gray as the title, for example, or the font. If you want to visually break it up, which I'm not opposed to, I just think it might create a bit of confusion, because to me it looks like it relates to Germans, but the Americans also have that orangey bit.
Yeah, it should be some sort of neutral color.
Yeah, Austri says, I just threw it in there to look pretty. It does look pretty. Maybe it just needs a different color.
But yeah, always good work, and good work yet again.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have Rado Zatovic, who just started following me on YouTube, I recall. I do still see his name pop up. Okay, so this one I need to make a bit smaller, I think. Oh.
So how would you rate the current relationship between Germany and the United States? Germans say bad 79%, Americans bad 21%. So it's kind of like just the area chart take on the original, isn't it? So the original had the good and bad lines. This time it's expressed as an area chart with the don't know section in the middle. So it works.
Yeah.
So I mean, bad and good, red and blue, that's kind of fine. There's no sort of color deficiency issues there. I think it looks all right.
I agree. I find it the colors a little bit, I don't know, they remind me of something. I'm just not quite sure what. It makes me think of like a bathing suit or candy or something.
Toothpaste.
Second?
Toothpaste.
Toothpaste, yeah, that's probably pretty accurate. I think there's a bit too much white space up there, so above the charts. I would condense that somehow a bit. But yeah, I really like how it says Germans say bad, good. Like, it makes it so nice and simple. So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I think like you said, maybe shrink the width of it a little bit, squeeze that title in a little bit, and make the whole thing a little narrower, and lose a bit of that white space, because it is just a big gap.
Yeah. Okay. Anastasia. Let's check out her viz.
So we've got, it's like a butterfly comet chart. So the thing that confuses me with this one is that, so it's on the same vertical plane, which is fine, but the sizing of the circles is the same. So the German good response of 42%, which is the first year, because it's got this min-year value, is the same size as the American, or sorry, the German 56%. So the circle size being the same confuses me, and similarly the 18% is the same size as the 79. And then the fact that they're on the same vertical plane confuses me a little bit as well, because you've got 42% vertically in the same place as 56%. So the size is the same, the vertical positioning is the same, the horizontal positioning is basically the same, but it's butterfly, so it really twists the way you'd want to understand it.
It feels like it's designed that way for the sake of the comet chart, not to make the data easier to understand.
Yeah, and Andy, again, super useful, is saying that it's screaming out slope chart, and it is, because it's just looking at the first year, the last year. it would make so much more sense for this to be plotted on that basis, and then you'd see that trajectory of, is it up or down, and then how is that relative to the United States? It would make it an awful lot clearer. So the comet chart just doesn't make sense to me with this data.
Yeah, plus there's so much white space that's unused. It could be used effectively, I think, with a different visualization and maybe some additional text.
Yep.
Okay. Samuel Epley.
Okay, cool. So Samuel wins prize for including the transitions, which are, I'm surprised they're still relatively underused, I think. I thought they would go absolutely crazy, but they're used fairly conservatively. So Germans perceive Americans unfavorably, so that's pretty direct to the point, but that's kind of what the survey said. Mm-hmm. Good subtitle. The toggle between the countries is cool, so we can see that transition, which works really nicely, I think, with these bars. And he's just plotted this net favorability rating on the end to show that actually you get to see that scale of the favorability of the American responses generally, and the negativity of the German responses. So it's really good. There's not too much color. There's a black background, but it works. It's not, the text is perfectly clear enough on there, I think. If you were to nitpick, which is what I do, that toggle between the countries is really wide. It doesn't necessarily need to take up that whole section there. So there might be a better way to take that up, to include that. But everything else just works really nicely.
Yes. What I would do is I would remove some of the boldness from the font, because everything is bold. It's very blocky and heavy looking. And there's a typo in the bottom. There's a G missing. It should be Körperstiftung, so with a G at the end. So just making that complete. But apart from that, because it says it under survey details, so yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice, and I like the idea of the net favorability measure there, because it's always good to add an extra metric if it adds value, and I think it makes sense to have that one.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've got Kevin Wee next, and I think Kevin is in the chat. Yeah, there he is.
Typically is, yeah.
And so he's actually adopted the same net favorability ranking or rating as Samuel had, so that's cool. And I'm biased because this is kind of the same way I presented the data, but it's better, which is annoying. But you know, it's the way it is. But so we've got divergent columns really, and I liked this way of doing stuff, because when I think of stuff vertically, I would think like the cream rising to the top. So good is at the top, bad is at the bottom. So it makes sense to me to have this orientation. So that works for me. The only question I would have is, does it make sense to have a negative percentage? So I don't think it does. I think it's fine to say that 50% of people had a negative response, but it's not minus 50% of respondents, because that doesn't make sense. It's still 50% of the respondents. So I would just correct the axis. I think that's the main thing I would take away from this one.
Yes, and I wonder, so is that, the net score? I mean, I guess that is, you would just use I guess he wants to represent the value of the score. So he's got the positive scores on the right side, and then the negative ones on the left side. So I guess if you look at it as the positivity, it's negative because there are more negative responses than positive ones.
So Kevin said in the chat he wasn't sure how to flip those negative values to positive. So it's just about formatting of that field. So you can just force it to make everything positive, or you could, I guess, use an absolute value.
Absolute value, yeah. If you just, I think the syntax is ABS bracket and then your field and then close bracket. Then it will always be, positive.
But it's good, and I like the way he's included colour sort of in that y-axis for good and bad, just to make that. It's quite subtle, but it works because it's on the left, and that's kind of the way my eyes are travelling around this stuff. So I really, really like it. It's nice work. I think that maybe if you were to make a consideration of pushing the axis to fix at 100%, but you're not really likely to get 100% respondents in the same section, but it might be a consideration. But yeah, it's really nice work, Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and then Chimdi. Okay. Oh, need to zoom out a bit because this is very tall, and that's the first thing I notice is, why is it so big? Because the chart takes up about 50% of the space. There's a lot of border around it, I suppose, or empty space.
Yeah. So yeah, there's quite a lot of empty space, and then the top section with the title and the section to the right of it it's like they're having a bit of a scrap and trying to figure out which one's the dominant piece. And I think the right section probably is dominant for me, maybe distracted by the color or something, but it feels like, even though Divergent Opinions is in bold, my eyes are straying over to the right. So I think Chimdi needs to find that balance a little bit better in that top section, just to make the left-hand section more prominent and just shift the stuff underneath to make it just a conventional subtitle, I think.
Yeah, I think this one is too simplified for me because there is the 0% axis, but it's not clear to me that all of those numbers are percentages. I have to read that at the top. I think also having them so close together, I would be tempted to make it 2 charts if you can't create space in between them, because it's not intuitive, that's the word I'm looking for, to go 2017, 18, 19, 20, 2017, 18, like,
yeah.
Most people would read this as one long line probably, because it looks very continuous, and this is where the Gestalt principles come in. You know, as things look like they belong together, they move into the same direction, we perceive them to be one thing. But because we're having a break in the years here, because this is for each country, you need to visually break it up. And I wouldn't put banding behind it. I would prefer to split the 2 charts, split into 2 charts and create more empty space between.
Yeah, so again, they're small changes, but they'd add up. So title, space, separate the charts, and I think that would improve it quite a lot.
Yeah, and you could, so if you have the title, maybe the Divergent Opinions right in the middle, nice and big, and then you use the stuff that's on the right side, push it to the side, and have good, really fat at the top and bad, really fat at the bottom. That explains your colors and kind of reinforces that, and that's something you could test out.
Yep.
Okay. Parinita. The chat is very alive, which is great, with our usual suspects: Michelle, Denise, Agatha, Kevin. Who else do we have? Ahmad, Swati. We have Brandon, Andy, of course, causing trouble. Hitesh has arrived. Kimberly King. Excellent work. Okay.
Okay, so Paranita. So this is where I thought I was being clever when selecting the list. So we'll see how this pans out. So, but this has got echoes of what we had earlier on when we were debating whether having responses and countries and stuff in the view work. So this is pretty much similar to the original, though rather than having line charts plotting the responses over year, we've got in each year, we can see that response rate. So good is green, we can see the German trajectory is generally downwards, the Americans generally upwards. So you can see that trend nice and clearly. So it definitely works, but it has that problem of, if you're wanting to compare the countries rather than to look at the trend within the country, you're having to do some left to right comparisons to say, all right, is 18% favourable from German respondents in 20 to 74 in the States. So that you can do it, but your eyes jump around a little bit. So I've got not much more to say about this specific one, apart from that it is making the viewer do a little bit of work. But I think the next one shows what the suggestion would be to overcome this.
Okay. In that case, let's take your feedback and jump to the next one.
This is where it all goes horribly wrong.
Compare.
So Priyanka's next.
Okay.
Look at this. It's like a seamless dream. So, but it's how much easier now is it to compare in year the good response? So we've even got the same colour scheme pretty much, apart from the yellow versus grey. But I can see in 17 now that difference between Germany and the States really, really easily. And I can go to 20 and see that difference really, really easily. So just a tiny little detail like moving a discrete field away from columns and moving on to row, this is like the smallest little thing you can do in Tableau pretty much. But just that ease of interpretation just by making that little change is huge. So that's kind of why I put these two one after the other, because I think this is such a minor little detail, but I think this one's a lot more easy to interpret.
Yeah, let me do a bit of flicking between them. So I've got easy, a bit harder, and easier again. Now, one thing I would say here about Priyanka's is I totally agree with you. It's easier to see it within the year for both countries in comparison. The colors are a bit much for me. It's a bit Brazilian football kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I would tone it down, maybe try a grayscale. You know, you could have 2 different shades of gray so that you can highlight the one you want to focus on. And everyone who is using Tableau, like Charlie said, that it's so easy to change the charts. And I would recommend, you know, you start with something, maybe you're already invested in it. You're like, nah, I like this, I'm going to stick with it. Just for your own benefit, duplicate it so that it stays intact, and then just swap those fields around on the rows and columns. Swap rows and columns, swap fields within the rows and within the columns, and see what happens. Because that's how I typically find, oh, this is a much easier way to show it, because you don't really anticipate that in your head what it's going to look like. But once you see it, I mean, that's why it's so good to do that, because you so quickly and easily see it. And this is a good example of that.
Yep. So I think the only thing I might change if I was Priyanka is there's this wording just above the first values in 2017 says the percent who say relations between the countries are ... But it doesn't explicitly say the good and bad there. So I'd think about how I position that.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have Aditya. Okay, so Kimberly asked a question about the colors. She says, there are a variety of colors being used this week. Is there any suggestions as to which color palette is preferred for this data set? I don't have a personal preference. I'm a fan of as little color as possible, making it look harmonious. When I personally design my visits, I like to remember this thought of, if Apple had to design this, what would it look like? You know, because I'm a fan of things being minimalist and looking nice and clean, and color being used very selectively. I wouldn't go down the political route. I wouldn't involve the flags, because, you know, each flag has 3 colors, which is then 6 colors, and you haven't even started writing any words or adding chart colors. So I'd keep it simple. And last week I talked about background colors. I'm not a huge fan of dark backgrounds if it's not a very emotional topic. So this one, I think, is probably not super emotional. What about you, Charlie? How do you see the colours this week?
I think we've got similar tastes when it comes to colour. So colour is a distraction. So if you're framing a viz to highlight the fact that a certain trend is good or a certain trend is bad, then maybe use that colour in the title to pick out the element you want, and then use that colour again in the charts and mute the other one. So we quite often use a white or a grey or a black for the non-focal response in this case. So if I was just looking at good responses in this, I'd use the blue perhaps that Aditya's used, and then I wouldn't have the orange. I'd have it as a grey or a black or a white, just to push it into the background, because you want people to see the data that you're drawing their attention to rather than be distracted by the secondary bit of data.
And I think it's easy to forget how many colors there actually are. So when we look at this viz, and if I were to say how many colors do you see, people might say 2, blue and yellow. But then there's white in the font, there's black in the font, there's
pinky,
like
reddy,
dirty kind of green in the background, and there's pink. So we're already using 6 different colors, and that's a lot. And a lot of them are not necessary. I think all the font could have the same color, the background could be white. In that case, we would only have 4 colors. I mean, white being, I guess, a non-color. But yeah, the greenish gray and the pink can definitely go. And I think the white doesn't add much because on the background, black, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, with this one, it looks like we've got like a continuous timeline. So you get this funny axes and then you get really wide bars. I don't, but the bars that are wide, I don't know, I just find them a bit strange. They just don't look right to me. I'd rather there was a little gap. I know they are continuous periods of time, but they're separate surveys. So I would kind of want to see them as separate entities. And then there's a little bit of functionality leverage to populate the sentence underneath to show the response rates, but it doesn't add any value. We know which countries they are. We know if the response is good or bad. We can see the labels on there already. So the bottom bit is unnecessary, and that pink is a distraction. So I would lose the sentence at the bottom, lose the pink, narrow the bars, make it discrete. And like Eva said, the greeny background, I don't know, it doesn't really work that well for me. So I think a bit of color choice and remove 1 or 2 elements would make this easier.
Yeah, and I think this point you made about the wide charts, I think they start looking like an area or like like some kind of shape on a map rather than an actual bar that is typically fairly slim and but it should look like it's longer than it is wide. And in 18 it's really wide, but it's not particularly tall. Okay. Oh, this is very different. So this is Mia's first submission and attempt on Makeover Monday, and his first.
It's a new tool, and it's wicked. So, like, when you watch it going, I think it's amazing.
Ooh! This is all very very dynamic, isn't it?
It's cool, isn't it? I've never heard of this thing. So I don't know how new it is. I don't know if anyone else has heard of it.
Once, I remember I've seen this logo before. Maybe I did get some inspiration on Pinterest and it was done in Infogram. But okay, what do we do here? Okay, so we can't really click on things, but we can hover and we get some dynamic tooltips.
Yeah, so I think this is just like the shiny new things situation, isn't it? Because we looked at it and we're like, "Ooh, look at this!" And then when you get below the excitement of that. It's quite a simple viz. What we've talked about a second ago was color, and this is color heavy. So we've got very dominant circles down the middle for the years. They're like the overwhelming element of the chart. The titles sit on a very red background, which is quite full on. Denise has said this feels like Olympic medals, and she's probably got that quite right. But then we've got color use of good, but we've got blue and we've got yellow for good, and then we've got red and we've got black for bad. So there's just like an overuse of color for the same responses, which probably needs to be reeled in. Plus we've got the flags that don't add much. So I think I was seduced by the animations at the start and the way it landed, but I think for this to really hit home, it just needs to be just reeled in a little bit in terms of its color use.
And I think it's just, the title is there and stuff, but it's just not really explained. So respondents needs another N. So it says diverging opinions on transatlantic alliance. As a layperson, what does that mean? It's not immediately obvious to me that this is about what one thinks about the other. So if I figure that out, okay, so then I see good and bad, but it says Germany respondents, and it has just a number, 42. Is it the number of people? No, it's a percentage. So this also, aside from the colors, it needs more context and more explanations, but also just a bit of thought into what is really important information for people who look at this.
Yeah, and it's just the layout piece, because the title refers to this sentiment shift, but what do I need to do to see the shift in American good responses? I've got to scroll my head down top to bottom to see that movement from 68 to 74. And just because it's arranged like it is, it's not got like a chronology to it, which you would normally expect from left to right. So that you can't do that sequential moving through the years just because of the way it's laid out. So you would spin this round to be running along a row rather than in a column to get that consistency of the year view. So sexy tool. Andy says he's used it before. I think just hold fire on some of the colors and think about the layout and how you've described it.
Yeah, agreed. And then we have Luther. Relations at their worst. Oh my god, that's so funny.
Hey.
The word Wurst, sausage, is used in so many German sayings. I didn't realize until I lived abroad how many things, like, if you say I don't care, in Germany we say, well, this is very colloquial, but we say ist mir Wurst, like it's sausage to me, which makes 0 sense grammatically, but it's hilarious. We have, oh my god, I can't even say this on air, right? But we have this kids game every time I mention this to someone, people are like, you do what? So for kids' birthday parties, I think this will make people laugh. For kids' birthday parties, we take these Wiener sausages, so they come, how they come in a jar?
Yeah.
And you clip them to the clothing line outside, and then the kids have to keep their hands on their back, and then they have to jump up and try to eat the sausage.
Jesus Christ. I think you did well moving.
I did not think much of it until people started being completely outraged. I'm like, I just thought it was I still think it's hilarious. But obviously not everyone agrees. But we are a country that eats a lot of meat, especially a lot of sausage shaped meat. Anyway, I'm not going into a good one. But, so we have a lot of words for that and that I'm involved in saying. So I like seeing this title, and I'm going to stop there because this is just going somewhere bad.
It's a slippery slope, right? So
very much.
Relations at their worst. So he's inspired by The Economist, so you can see that immediately with that like stripy bit and the pink bit. So that's cool, and it's got that echo of it. I like how it has this illusion of being a single chart, but that earlier, not very long ago, it was Chimney, wasn't it, where we had those bars that were side by side with no separation between the countries, and you said we're crying out for space, and Luther's created that space, but still achieved it being a single chart, and it works because of that distancing. I don't know if it's better than having separate charts, but it works better because there is that space. I think the lines are a bit thick for my taste.
Especially because the thin line at the top, the red line, I think it should be that thickness.
But it's very similar, isn't it, to the original? So was the original based on the country and then the response rate in the column? I think it was. So it's just like a little slight spin on the original. But it's nice and clean, isn't it? I wish in Tableau we could do what was on the Pew Research one, where you just stick a percentage after one of the values on the axis. That would be so nice. It's such a little request.
Yeah.
Just wish we could do that.
Much like the labels where you can say always show or never show, you could do that on the axis, right? Yeah.
So I think I quite like. I wonder if this is almost like an overuse of colour, because I don't know. I suppose the title's quite neutral, but you could.
You've got the country labels. You don't really need them to be in colour, the lines, because it's pretty clear what each line is related to.
So I think we maybe slim those lines down a bit. Consider tinkering with colour to make it a little bit more subdued, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's nice.
And I do have to come back to my story because Denise says it's like bobbing for apples. And we play that game too at kids' birthday parties, where you've got all those apples in a bucket of water and you have to grab them. But I always found it made me really sick because you drink so much water while also eating apples, which is just not a good combination. We also do, especially in winter, it's more for kids' birthday parties in winter, where you dress up with hat and scarf and gloves, and then you have to unwrap a block of chocolate and cut it with knife and fork.
What?
Yeah, I know. But I think it's timed, so you get to eat whatever you manage to get to in that time. But you have to use knife and fork, and you have to use these heavy mittens. And if you don't get to it, I don't know, the next kid gets to go, and you have to like quickly undress, and they get dressed, and yeah, it's quite hilarious.
Like, these things shape you though when you're growing up, don't they?
They certainly do. Okay.
So we've got Rowan Barwer here. So declining American-German relationship during Trump's rule. Well, yeah, so 8 out of 10 Germans believe the relationship between the countries to be in poor shape. So that positioning of the title almost feels like it is saying that all perceptions are that the relationship's declined, but actually we can see from the data that the American respondents suggested it was better. So just be careful with how you're positioning your title if it's not necessarily shown in the data.
Yeah. I find I don't like the dark blue for American in the title almost doesn't look blue. It almost looks like it's just bold. So I would associate it, and I kind of have to go across, and then German is down, and then American's across. This is a title where the shading behind the words that we've started to see more and more would work really well. So I think also because this is connected between the years, I find this confusing because the relationship, so because it says declining, but actually what the decline of the relationship from the German perspective is shown through a growth in these bad responses. So maybe it's an increase of perception that the relationships are poor, because visually it's an increase here for the bad, and in the US it's an increase in the good. And I think with the words, it's not really gelling for me.
Yeah, and I didn't pay as much attention as I should have done to scrutinising the data set, but it looks like we've got average responses across the 4 years here, and I don't know if the sample sizes were the same each year. I can't remember seeing it, so it just feels a bit risky putting that in if it wasn't shown in the data source. And the chart type confuses me a little bit because it's almost like a parallel coordinates thing. It's like a mashup between a very skinny bar chart, a slope chart, an area chart. I don't know. I kind of like the shape of it, but it feels a bit weird.
Yeah, because we've got another continuous axis for the years. So, the view is just resetting. So it just makes this weird. It's like shading between the bars and this line on top. It's a bit odd. I think I would just stick to having normal bars.
Yeah, it's because you almost it makes this intermediate midpoint that's kind of like, oh, this is what they said in June 2017 or something, and it creates a data point which isn't there. So I think it's probably best to treat them as discrete things.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have KT.
So this has got echoes of something we've talked about already with Chimney's work, where there isn't enough separation between Germany and the United States, is there? So it looks like one continuous series of 8 things, and particularly the axis titles are tiny at the bottom, real small. So unless you're really paying attention, you don't see that it goes from 1920 and then back to 17. So Eva's already said in some earlier ones, it might be an idea to separate the 2 charts just to give them that breathing space. And I think that is the best solution. So Luther had that wider chart with white space, but having them as proper separate charts removes a bit of that risk of confusion. And
is it a bit jumbled on your screen as well with the coloured background on the right side? Because I have the boxes of colour are just really strange.
It fits all right for me, but it's confusing. So first of all, I'm not a massive fan of having a mix of bold stuff and normal stuff, and then inline colouring, and then sort of just text colouring. Because it's hard for me to actually understand, without using a tooltip, which one is actually good and which one's bad. Because I've got bad is highlighted in the sort of browny red.
Mm-hmm.
But then good is the background of it is the browny red. So is the good white or is the good the brown? So it is the browny red, but it's not super clear.
True. Yeah.
So I think if you were to use that inline colouring in this way, just focus on the one that you want to call out. So rather than have the 68 or rather than having the 72% and good coloured like they are, just have them black and leave the bad and the 68% as the prominent things. But it just feels a bit weird to have that off to the right.
Mm-hmm.
I'd almost have that as a subtitle.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Brandon suggested rightly that because the bars are not adding up to 100% and it looks a bit odd, to just add a note that, this only includes the actual good or bad responses, not the don't know.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to point out, because I do have the Tableau interface showing here for Tableau Public, is in your description somewhere, it would be great if you can use the hashtag Makeover Monday, like spelled out properly, because that is how we can, and we don't, but other people do, track how many visitors are tagged with Makeover Monday on Tableau Public. So the tip that I learned from Andy is what he always does is he has, for his file name on his computer, he has hashtag Makeover Monday, week, whatever the number, and then a dash, and then the title for the topic. And what I do is every week I just kind of click on the one from the previous week, adjust it to whatever the latest is, so I don't have to type it fully out. But when I upload it, it immediately puts the hashtag in the proper format into the description, and I don't have to do anything else. And automation is the way to go.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. And pulley. I've got another black and white one.
Yeah, so this one's it's a nice idea. It's combining a load of different concepts in there, because I think it's not just a couple of line charts. I think it's also like a stacked bar chart. So it's showing that in Germany, the black section is, I think, bad relationship shows. So there's the larger section of that top bit in black is the equivalent of 68% of that whole vertical space. And in the States, the white area, I think, is 72%, which is the average of the responses for the Americans. So it's sneaking in two layers of information, but it is quite subtle. I could be overreading that, but no, I think they are different. I think they are done on that basis. But what I struggle with on this is the nature of the design means that you've got this gap between 2017 in the top one and 2017 in the bottom. So it just feels a bit weird.
Yeah, that's true. Plus, the 68% is lower than the 56% above. So the axes should probably be fixed.
Yeah. I think that it is quite hard to understand which is good and bad in this one. So while we've said sometimes colour's overused, I think colour can be underused as well. So it could be beneficial to perhaps find a way to make it a little bit clearer what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, and not using an average across. Because that's just, don't average the averages, and don't, especially when you don't know what the sample size is for each year. Okay, Darlene is next. She's all about the dumbbell charts. And Denise rightly says that she's not sure average means much since it is a moving opinion, and I agree. They probably ask different people each time, but also it's based on a different, I guess, mood or circumstance at the time, as things change constantly. Plus, if they did ask the same people, maybe they did change their opinions. So, yeah.
Yep. So Darlene's viz is dominated by the big smiley faces. So perceptions of transatlantic relations. So we've got America is the red, Germany is, well, it's sort of purpley at the top, but more like a dark grey in the charts. So the problem I've got with this is the big smiley faces, you get the idea, but it's not, it's similar to the problems we've had before where you've got these axes merging. it gets a bit confusing because it almost implies that there's this transition from the 2020 point for sadness to this sudden surge of positivity because of the way the axes are laid out. So I think I'd look to separate these.
Yeah, I find with those horizontal charts, sometimes it's not easy for me to remember that this is not point A to point B, but actually two different countries at one point in time, because it looks like it goes from, like you said, 22 to 56, rather than 22 is America and 56 is Germany. I don't know if I've there's not much more really I can add to that one. I think the colouring on the line between, I would ditch that, just have them as just a black or a neutral line between, because they're not really opinions that meet. Yeah, agreed. Okay, how are you for time, Charlie?
I'm good, how are you?
Yeah, I think we can do another couple. What do we have? Oh, Vivian Ho. Okay. Vivian is next. Oh, nice colours. I like those.
Yeah, it is nice, isn't it? So, diverging opinions on the Transatlantic Alliance. So I think this is the first one we've had this week with the panel of information on the left, and it works quite nicely. It flows. Gives some good context to what was the actual question, and then builds a little bit of a story about it. So rather than just relying on the data, it's sort of built that into some descriptive text, which is good.
I really like the design. I think that's really nicely done.
It is, and it ticks a lot of the boxes that we've talked about in terms of separating the charts. So they're quite close, but they are distinct, separate things. I like the fact that the y-axis is only shown once because it doesn't need to be shown twice. So there's little decisions like that are really good.
I'd probably repeat the color legend under the countries, just because it took me a while to even see that good is in blue, because the font is quite thin. So I think it's a bit hard to tell. I mean, it's logical because to me blue is more of a positive color than a negative color, but maybe just under United States and under Germany having maybe a little dot or a square or something, and good, bad. Even just once is probably enough.
I think the challenge you get with stacked area charts like this is it's really easy for us to see that the United States good responses are much higher than the German good responses, that they kind of have to be the opposite, but you can't do that with this, which is a benefit of having line charts where you don't have that sort of stacking of the numbers. So it's I think it's fine here. I think it's particularly fine if you frame it just to look at the good responses, but it's just a consideration to make with this sort of stuff.
Yeah, good point. Okay.
So this is one of your favourites from last week.
Gorest. Yes, he's been doing great work. Okay, are we still good? Oh, that's quite a clever subtitle. But I think it takes a little while. I mean, unless I look straight at the charts, but from the title, I don't know, it's about Germany and the US.
Yeah, that's true. So I was wondering how to read this thing because I saw it. And okay, so it's just plotting. So country by country, what was the difference between the response? So this is just looking at the good responses. So Germany in 2017, the response rate was 42% thought it was good, and that's down to 18. So that's fine, and I can see it. And for the States, you can see actually it's improved a little bit. So it works and it plots the information. Is it quick to grasp? I don't know. I think, you don't always have to do a boring chart, like a slope chart or a bar chart, but they're very quick to see, and I've had to do a bit of work to interpret this one.
Yeah, for me, the color for 2017, like, I'm thinking that's the more dominant color. But the story says it's worrying that the relations have decreased or the perceptions have changed over those years. So I'm guessing the end point in 2020 in Germany is like, that's the worrying bit, even though in the US it's gotten better. So I would probably swap those colors around. At least for me, the pink is bright, like more prominent than the blue.
Yeah, so I think it's creative, but it's not intuitive.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Let's see. Let's do one more till 10 past, and then I need to get away from the screen. Which one do you want to pick?
Let's go with which was next? Actually, let's go with Ryan Hart's.
Okay.
So, the Transatlantic Alliance, the good and bad of it. See, this is interesting because it's kind of like this one's quite subtle. So the top section is just about the German responses, and the bottom section is about the American responses. But it almost feels like it's one slope chart, doesn't it, for everything? So I guess that makes the point that the best German response. Well, no, because it's not on the same scale. So it's awkward because of that. Because if everything was on the same chart and this was what the pattern was, you'd say, oh right, I can see that the best ever German response was still lower than the worst ever American response, and you'd be able to see things that way. But it's not arranged like that, so it all merges together a little bit for me.
Yeah, it's a really wide viz. I don't know why the slope chart, oh, where's my mouse, goes so much further than the text, because where the text cuts off, that would be the perfect width, I think. To me, it feels like, you know those kids' toys, those wooden things where you put a marble at the top and it kind of rolls down and goes through a hole and rolls. That's what it makes me think of. But I find it very hard to read because I just see really long lines with bubbles at the end. But I think we've seen a lot of visitors now saying, what did the Germans think? What did the Americans think? But it's like, just tell me what they thought. Don't make me work so hard. And I think this makes me work too hard to interpret what did the Germans think? Okay, so in 2017, 56% thought it was bad. Now it's more. What does that mean? Okay, oh, that means, this and that. Like, I think it could be easier for the audience.
Yeah, Brandon's made a very good comment in the chat to say, actually, some of the most effective things we've seen today have been where stuff has been arranged side by side rather than on top of each other, and this would probably benefit from that same sort of arrangement. So I think that's probably the best thing to suggest here. And the layout of the title and subtitles is a bit clunky for me. Again, it's like two separate things that don't really look like they hang together too well. So maybe do that side-by-side panel and tidy up that title.
And if you have the side-by-side, you can fix the axes and then you see how much higher
exactly.
the Americans are compared to the Germans.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think we'll wrap it up here. I just need a bit of time away from the screen. It's been a bit of a computer-heavy week. But, well, there's obviously some, maybe for those who are wondering, Makeover Monday will continue all through like Christmas and stuff. And tomorrow at this time, 5 p.m. UK time, we're going to do an Ask Me Anything. And he's going to ask me questions. I'm a bit nervous about it. We'll see what people submit. I've been told I can't look. So in the beginning I looked at the questions and then I'm like, probably shouldn't. I probably should just be surprised. So I hope that some people will tune in for that.
Do you know how many questions you've got so far?
I don't, but Andy should know if he has checked. But yeah, he's collecting, so we will see. And I think next week is probably, I don't know about Viz Review over the holidays because we're going to be in the US, so time zone wise, and we don't want to just sit in the house in front of the computer all over the break.
No.
So maybe Viz Review will stop, but Makeover Monday will keep going. But yeah, for now, hopefully this was helpful. Actually, let me bring our faces back. There we are. Hopefully this was helpful for people. And any last words of wisdom, Charlie, from your side for people to consider?
I wouldn't change the habit of a lifetime, so I've given none so far. So no, I'm going to get my holiday hair sorted out tomorrow so everyone can marvel at how neat I look when we're next on.
Excellent. I see Henry just commented, see you next time, I'm bored. Well, Henry, I will see you on Sunday and we will check out a puppy and I'm sure it's going to be fun. So anyway, cool. Thank you, Charlie. Enjoy the rest of